My mother's text arrived at 7:47 in the evening, 3 days before Christmas. I was sitting in my home office, a glass of wine untouched beside my laptop, when my phone lit up with her name. For a moment, I felt that old flutter of hope. Maybe she was calling to apologize. Maybe she'd realized how wrong it was to exclude me from another family gathering. Maybe, after 38 years, she was finally choosing me. I opened the message. "Don't come home for Christmas. Your sister is against you." I read it twice, then a third time. 9 words. 9 words to summarize everything I'd ever meant to my family. But here's the thing. I didn't cry. I didn't call her back to plead my case. I didn't type an angry response or throw my phone across the room. I smiled, because my mother had just told me not to come to my house for Christmas. And she had absolutely no idea that the house she was banning me from had belonged to me for 3 years. I set down my phone and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside sat a folder I hadn't touched in months. Legal documents, property deeds, a purchase agreement dated 3 years ago, signed by a company called Carter Legacy Holdings, LLC, a company I owned entirely, a company that held the title to 247 Maple Street, the house my father built, the house my mother and sister had been living in rent-free while treating me like a ghost. My mother thought she was closing a door. She didn't realize she'd just handed me the key. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 38 years old, a financial consultant living in downtown Boston. I have a corner office, a retirement account most people would envy, and an apartment so organized it looks like a magazine spread. I built all of this myself. Scholarships, night classes, 12-hour workdays, years of saying no to vacations and luxuries while my sister Laura spent money like it grew on trees. I learned early that no one was coming to save me, so I saved myself. My family never noticed. That was the point, I suppose. I was the invisible daughter, the one who didn't need attention, the one who could be counted on to show up early, help clean up, and never complain when her name was forgotten in the gratitude speeches. Laura was different. Laura was the golden child, the one my mother protected and praised and prioritized. When we were growing up, Laura got the new car at 16. I got a bus pass and a reminder to be grateful for what I had. Laura's college was paid for in full. I worked 3 jobs and graduated with honors and debt. Laura's wedding had 200 guests and a 5-tier cake. I sat in the back row and no one asked why I wasn't a bridesmaid. I used to wonder what I'd done wrong. What flaw in my character made me so easy to overlook? But somewhere along the way, I stopped wondering. I stopped expecting my mother to show up for my graduations, my promotions, my life. I stopped inviting her to things because the disappointment of her absence hurt more than never asking at all. And then my father died 3 years ago, and everything changed. I looked at the text message again. "Your sister is against you. Not we decided or we need some space. No, your sister is against you." My mother couldn't even pretend this was her choice. She was hiding behind Laura the way she always had. Laura wanted me gone, so I was gone. That was the equation. That had always been the equation. But this time I had something Laura didn't know about, something none of them knew about. I picked up my phone and called Diana Walsh. Diana was my attorney, but over the past 3 years she'd become something closer to a friend. She answered on the second ring, even though it was almost 8 o'clock on a December evening. "Emily, I was wondering when you'd call." "You knew this was coming." Diana laughed softly. "I know your family. I figured Christmas would be the breaking point." "What happened?" I told her about the text. About my mother's words, about Laura's invisible hand pulling the strings, about the fact that they'd just told me not to come to a house I legally owned. Diana was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you want to do?" "I want them to know. Not everything. Not yet. Just enough to shake the foundation." "I can have a formal notice drafted by morning. Certified mail or email?" "Email. I want to see how fast they panic." Diana asked if I was sure. I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. For 3 years, I'd been paying the mortgage on that house. For 3 years, I'd been covering the property taxes, the insurance, the repairs. For 3 years, I'd watched my mother and sister live in my father's legacy while treating me like I didn't exist. And I'd said nothing, because I was waiting for them to see me, waiting for them to change. But they weren't going to change. That text message proved it. My mother would always choose Laura. Laura would always see me as competition to be eliminated. And I would always be the daughter standing outside the door, waiting to be let in. Not anymore. I walked to my bookshelf and picked up the single-framed photo I kept there. My father, smiling, his arm around my shoulders at my college graduation. He'd driven 3 hours to be there. He'd sat in the front row. He'd taken me to dinner afterward and told me he was proud of me, that he'd always been proud of me, that he wished my mother could see what he saw. "She doesn't worry about you because you've never given her a reason to," he'd said that night. "That's not fair. I know it's not fair. But Emily, you're going to be okay. You're going to be more than okay. And one day, they'll see what I see." He died 2 years later, and I discovered that the house he'd built was 63 days from foreclosure because my mother had refinanced it 3 times to pay off Laura's credit card debt. So I bought it, quietly, through an LLC, before the bank could take it. I saved my father's house the way I'd saved myself, alone, without thanks, without recognition. Because that's what invisible daughters do. They protect things. They fix things. They hold families together while everyone else falls apart. But I was done being invisible. I was done being the safety net no one acknowledged. I was done waiting for a seat at a table that was never set for me. I opened my laptop and began composing an email. The subject line was simple. Regarding property at 247 Maple Street, formal notice. The body was brief. A notification of ownership, a request for a formal family meeting to discuss the property's future. A deadline of December 24th. I attached one document, the deed, with my name on it. My finger hovered over the send button for just a moment. Once I did this, there was no going back. My mother would panic. Laura would rage. The family I'd spent my whole life trying to belong to would finally have to see me, even if they only saw me as the enemy. I pressed send at exactly 9 o'clock. Then I finished my wine, turned off my phone, and went to bed. Let them lose sleep for once. I'd been losing sleep over them for 38 years. I didn't know it then, but that email would bring my mother to my door within 24 hours. And for the first time in my life, she would be the one asking to be let in. I woke up the next morning to 17 missed calls. 12 from my mother, 5 from Laura, and one voicemail that was nothing but my sister screaming into the phone. I lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of Boston waking up outside my window. December 22nd, 3 days until Christmas, the day after I'd sent an email that would unravel everything my family thought they knew about me. I got up, made coffee, and did my morning yoga routine. The phone kept buzzing on the kitchen counter. I let it ring. For 38 years, I'd been the one waiting by the phone, hoping someone would call, hoping someone would remember I existed. Let them wait for once. I didn't listen to Laura's voicemail. I already knew what she sounded like when she was angry. High-pitched and breathless, words tumbling over each other, accusations flying like shrapnel. She'd been perfecting that voice since we were children, weaponizing her emotions to get what she wanted. It worked on our mother every single time. It had never worked on me. By noon, the calls had stopped. That's when I knew something else was coming. Laura never gave up that easily. She just changed tactics. I sat at my desk, pretending to work on a client's estate plan, but my mind kept drifting. The silence from my phone felt heavier than the ringing had. I found myself staring out the window at the Boston skyline, thinking about how I'd ended up here. Not geographically, emotionally. How I'd become a woman who could send a legal notice to her own family and sleep soundly afterward. The answer was simple. I'd been trained for this my whole life. I was 10 years old the first time I understood that I was different from Laura. Not better or worse, just different in a way that mattered to my mother. I came home from school one afternoon to an empty house, No note on the counter, no message on the answering machine. I made myself a peanut butter sandwich and did my homework at the kitchen table, watching the clock tick toward 6, then 7, then 8. My mother came home at 9 with Laura in tow, both of them glowing from some adventure I hadn't been invited to. A soccer game, my mother explained. Laura scored the winning goal. They went out for ice cream to celebrate. No one asked about my day. No one noticed I'd been alone for 5 hours. No one apologized. That became the pattern. Laura had soccer games and ballet recitals and birthday parties that required my mother's full attention. I had an empty house and a key around my neck, and the slowly forming understanding that I was on my own. By 13, I'd learned to stop expecting things. When I needed $25 for a school field trip, my mother said we couldn't afford it. That same week, Laura got a new dress for a dance. I told my teacher I was sick and stayed home while my classmates visited the science museum. I never mentioned the dress. There was no point. At 15, I got my first job. A grocery store 3 blocks from our house, stocking shelves after school and on weekends. I saved every dollar in a shoebox under my bed because when I asked my mother to help me open a savings account, she forgot. 3 times. I finally opened one myself on my 16th birthday, walking to the bank alone, signing the papers with a hand that didn't shake because I'd already learned that shaking hands got you nowhere. At 17, I received a full scholarship to Boston University. I was so excited I could barely breathe when I opened the letter. I ran downstairs to tell my family at dinner, the words spilling out of me in a rush. My mother smiled and said, "That's nice, honey." Then Laura announced she was trying out for cheerleading, and the conversation shifted. My scholarship was never mentioned again. Not at dinner, not at graduation, not ever. That night, my father came to my room. He sat on the edge of my bed and looked at me with eyes that saw everything my mother missed. "I'm proud of you, Em," he said. "A full scholarship. That's not luck, that's you." I wanted to cry, but I'd already learned that crying was a luxury I couldn't afford. "Mom didn't say anything," I said instead. My father was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother worries about Laura, because Laura needs worrying about. She doesn't worry about you because you've never given her a reason to." He paused. "That's not fair. I know it's not fair. It wasn't fair." But hearing him say it made something ease in my chest. At least someone saw me. At least someone knew. My father was the only one who ever did. And then, 3 years ago, he died. And I lost the only witness to my existence. I stood up from my desk and walked to the drawer where I kept his letter. Not the legal documents. A different envelope. This one was sealed, yellowed with age, my name written across the front in his handwriting. "For Emily," it said. "When you're ready." I'd received it from the estate attorney after my father's death. He'd left Laura $50,000 in cash, money that vanished within a year on shopping sprees and failed business ventures. He'd left me this envelope and a note that said, "You'll know when it's time." I held the letter in my hands, feeling its weight. I'd never opened it. Not because I was afraid of what was inside, but because I wanted to deserve it first. I wanted to prove that his faith in me wasn't misplaced. I wanted to earn whatever words he'd left behind. I put the envelope back in the drawer and closed it. Not yet, but soon. The afternoon passed slowly. I made dinner for one, ate standing at the kitchen counter, and thought about solitude versus loneliness. I'd chosen this life. The quiet apartment, the organized bookshelves, the absence of chaos that came with keeping my family at a distance. I didn't regret it. But sometimes late at night, I wondered what it would feel like to be part of something instead of apart from it. I'd built a life where I didn't need them. What I never figured out was how to stop wanting them to need me. Around 7 o'clock, I considered going to bed early. The day had been long, even though nothing had happened. Waiting was exhausting. Anticipating the storm was almost worse than weathering it. Then my doorbell rang. I froze. No one visited me without calling first, no one except delivery drivers, and I wasn't expecting any packages. I walked to the door and checked the security camera. The screen showed a woman standing in my hallway. Her face flushed red, her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. She was pacing back and forth, muttering to herself, clearly rehearsing whatever speech she planned to deliver. Laura. My sister had driven 45 minutes from the suburbs to downtown Boston on a December evening to confront me in person. She was wearing her expensive coat, the one that cost more than my first month's rent at my first apartment. Her hair was perfectly styled. Her nails were freshly manicured. She looked like a woman who had never worked a day in her life, which was almost true. I watched her for a moment through the camera. She raised her fist to knock, then lowered it, then raised it again. She was nervous. Good. She should be. I could ignore her. Pretend I wasn't home. Let her rage at an empty hallway until she got tired and left. That's what the old Emily would have done. The Emily who avoided conflict. The Emily who kept the peace by staying silent. But I wasn't that Emily anymore. I was the Emily who owned her family's house. The Emily who'd sent a legal notice to her own mother. The Emily who was done being invisible. I wanted to see Laura's face when she realized I wasn't backing down. I wanted to watch her understand for the first time in her life that she couldn't bully me into submission. I stood up, walked to the door, and paused with my hand on the lock. Through the camera, I watched my sister raise her fist to knock again. She looked furious. She looked scared. Good. It was about time someone in my family felt what I'd been feeling for years. I opened the door, and for the first time in our lives, Laura had to look up at me. Laura didn't wait for me to invite her in. The moment I turned the lock, she shoved past me like she still owned every room I walked into. Her heels clicked against my hardwood floors as she stormed into my living room. She was wearing that designer coat, the camel-colored one she'd bought last year with money she didn't have. Her leather bag probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her nails were painted a deep burgundy, fresh from a salon appointment that Nathan's credit card had funded. She spun around in the middle of my apartment, her eyes scanning every corner with barely concealed judgment. The clean lines of my furniture, the organized bookshelves, the single-framed photo of our father on the shelf. She looked at my life the way she'd always looked at me, like I was smaller than her, even when I wasn't. What the hell is wrong with you? She didn't wait for me to close the door. Her voice was already climbing toward that high-pitched register she used when she wanted to seem wounded. Do you have any idea what you've done? I shut the door quietly and leaned against it, arms crossed. I didn't say anything. I'd learned a long time ago that silence drew out more truth than questions ever could. Laura kept talking, her words tumbling over each other. She pulled out her phone and waved it at me, the screen showing my email from last night. "This legal notice," she said, practically spitting the words. "What is this supposed to be? Some kind of threat? Are you trying to scare Mom? Because congratulations, Emily, she's been crying all morning. Is that what you wanted?" I still didn't respond. I watched her pace across my living room, her agitation growing with every step. "You've always been jealous of me," she continued, "of our family, of the fact that Mom and I are close and you've always been on the outside. But this is low, even for you. You can't just send lawyers after your own family because your feelings got hurt about Christmas." She finally stopped pacing and stared at me, waiting for a reaction. Her chest was heaving. Her eyes were bright with anger and something else, something that looked almost like fear. I pushed myself off the door and walked toward her. My voice was calm when I finally spoke. "Did you actually read the email, Laura, or just the subject line?" Her eyes flickered. Just for a second, but I caught it. She hadn't read it carefully. Laura never read anything carefully. She just reacted. "I read enough," she said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. "Then you know it's not a threat. It's a notification of ownership and a request for a family meeting." I walked past her to my desk and opened the drawer. Nothing threatening about that. "Ownership?" Laura laughed, but it sounded hollow. "What are you talking about? That's Mom's house. It's been Mom's house since Dad built it. You can't just claim ownership because you're having some kind of midlife crisis." I pulled out the folder, the same one I'd looked at last night, the same documents I'd kept in that drawer for 3 years, waiting for the right moment. "Sit down, Laura. I'm not sitting down. I'm not staying. I came here to tell you to stop whatever game you're playing and apologize to Mom before you ruin Christmas for everyone. I set the folder on the coffee table and looked at my sister. Really looked at her. The expensive clothes, the perfect hair, the indignation radiating off her like heat. She was so certain she was the victim here. She always was. Sit down, I said again. Or leave. But if you leave, the next conversation we have will be through attorneys. Something shifted in her face. Confusion, mostly. Laura wasn't used to me giving orders. She wasn't used to me standing firm. Our whole lives, I'd been the one who bent, who accommodated, who stepped aside to let her pass. Not anymore. She sat down on my couch slowly, like she was lowering herself into enemy territory. Her eyes were fixed on the folder. I opened it and spread the documents across the coffee table. One by one, I laid them out. The purchase agreement, the bank records, the property deed. This is the deed for 247 Maple Street, I said. Mom and Dad's house, the house you grew up in, the house you've been living in for the past 3 years. I tapped the document with my finger. Notice the owner's name. Laura grabbed the paper and scanned it. I watched her face change as she read. Confusion, disbelief, denial. This is fake, she said. Her voice was smaller now. It's not fake. You forged this. I didn't forge anything. The house has been in my name for 3 years, 2 months and 14 days. I bought it from First National Bank after Dad died. Laura shook her head like she was trying to dislodge water from her ears. That's impossible. You can't just buy someone's house. You can when the bank is about to foreclose on it. The word hung in the air between us. Foreclose. I watched Laura try to process it. She looked at me, then at the deed, then back at me. Foreclose? That's ridiculous. Mom owns that house free and clear. Dad paid it off years ago. I almost felt sorry for her then. Almost. She genuinely didn't know. Either Mom had kept it from her, or Laura had never bothered to ask where the money was coming from. Probably both. Mom hasn't owned that house free and clear in over a decade, I said quietly. Someone took out loans against it. Multiple loans. By the time Dad died, the house was 63 days from foreclosure. Laura's face went pale. Who took out loans? I didn't answer. I let the silence do the work. Let her mind fill in the blanks I wasn't ready to confirm. Not yet. Not until the family meeting. So what? Laura's voice turned sharp again, defensive. So you bought the house. That doesn't give you the right to threaten us. To send legal notices like we're strangers. I haven't threatened anyone. I sent a notification of ownership and requested a meeting. A meeting? She stood up, the deed crumpling slightly in her grip. You want a meeting? Fine. Say whatever you need to say. Not here. At the house. Tomorrow. 2 o'clock. With Mom, Nathan, and Aunt Grace. Laura froze at the mention of Aunt Grace. Why would you invite her? Because someone in this family needs to witness the truth. And it's not going to be you. Her jaw tightened. I could see her calculating, trying to figure out my angle. Laura had always been good at manipulation, but she was terrible at strategy. She played checkers while I played chess. What are you trying to do, Emily? Her voice cracked. Destroy this family? I met her eyes without flinching. This family destroyed itself a long time ago. I'm just turning on the lights. She stared at me for a long moment. Then, in a voice I'd never heard from her before, small and scared, she asked the question that had been hanging over both of us since she walked through my door. Does this mean you can kick us out? I let the silence stretch. I thought about the past 3 years. The mortgage payments I'd made every month, the property taxes, the insurance, the roof repair after last year's storm. All of it done quietly, without recognition, without thanks. All of it done while my mother and sister lived in my house and told me I wasn't welcome for Christmas. It means I have the legal right to decide who lives in that house and under what terms, I said finally. It means that for 3 years, I've paid the mortgage, the taxes, the insurance, while you and Mom lived there rent-free. It means that when you told me not to come home for Christmas, you were telling me not to come to my own property. I watched her face as the reality sank in. 3 years. Rent-free. In a house she thought belonged to her. Laura threw the deed back on the table. This isn't over. No, it's not. That's why we're having a family meeting. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., at the house. She grabbed her bag and stormed toward the door. Then she stopped, turned back, her eyes blazing with something between fury and desperation. You've been planning this, haven't you? Waiting for the perfect moment to humiliate us. I looked at my sister. At this woman who had taken so much and understood so little. I've been waiting for you to see me, I said quietly. This was the only way I knew how. She didn't respond. She left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frames on my wall. I stood alone in my apartment, my heart pounding despite my calm exterior. I picked up the deed Laura had crumpled and smoothed it carefully. That was round 1. Tomorrow would be harder. An hour later, my phone buzzed. Not Laura, not Mom, Nathan, Laura's husband, a man who had barely spoken 10 words to me in 4 years of marriage. His message was 3 sentences. I don't know what's happening. Laura won't stop crying. But I think we need to talk. Just you and me. I stared at the message. Nathan had never reached out to me before, which meant Laura had told him something that scared him, something that made him question his own wife. I typed back, tomorrow, before the family meeting, I'll tell you everything. Whatever Laura was hiding, her husband was about to find out. 3 years ago, I sat in a lawyer's office and discovered that my family's home, the house my father built with his own hands, was 63 days away from being taken by the bank. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 1 week after my father's funeral. The grief was still fresh, still raw, sitting in my chest like a stone I couldn't swallow. I'd taken time off work to handle the estate paperwork. Someone had to do it, and we all knew it wasn't going to be Laura. She was too busy being comforted by our mother, too consumed by her own dramatic displays of mourning to deal with anything practical. The estate attorney's name was Mr. Harrison. He was a quiet man with gray hair and kind eyes, the sort of person who delivered bad news gently because he'd done it so many times before. He sat across from me in his oak-paneled office and slid a folder across the desk. I need to show you something, Miss Carter, about your parents' house. I opened the folder expecting mortgage statements, maybe some property tax documents. What I found instead made my blood run cold. Outstanding balance, $217,000. Missed payments, 11 months. Foreclosure notice, dated 6 weeks ago. I looked up at Mr. Harrison. That's impossible. My parents paid off this house years ago. I remember the party they threw when they made the final payment. My father cried. Mr. Harrison's expression was sympathetic but firm. They refinanced, he said, multiple times. The first was in 2018, then again in 2019, and a third time in 2020. I did the math in my head. My father was diagnosed with cancer in 2018. By 2019, he was too sick to manage the household finances. By 2020, he was barely conscious most days. Someone else had been making these decisions. Someone else had been signing those refinancing documents. Who authorized this? My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Hollow. Mr. Harrison pulled out another sheet of paper. The signatures were all there, neat and familiar. Margaret Carter, my mother. I stared at her name, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My mother could barely balance a checkbook. She'd never handled the family finances. My father had always taken care of everything. Do you know where the money went? I asked. Mr. Harrison handed me another stack of papers. Bank statements, transfer records, a roadmap of financial destruction laid out in black and white. I started reading, and that's when I saw my sister's name, over and over and over again. $15,000 transferred to Laura's account in March of 2018, $20,000 in July of the same year, another $12,000 in October. The pattern continued through 2019, 2020, 2021. Credit card payoffs in Laura's name, a down payment on Laura's car, Tuition for a business course Laura never finished. Deposits into accounts I'd never heard of. I added up the numbers as I went. By the time I reached the end of the statements, my hands were shaking. Over $200,000. That's how much had been extracted from my father's house, from his life's work, from the legacy he'd spent 40 years building. And every penny of it had gone to Laura. I drove home that night in a daze. I spread the documents across my kitchen table and traced every dollar, following the money like a detective following footprints in the snow. The picture that emerged was devastating, but not surprising. Not really. Laura had maxed out her credit cards. Mom refinanced the house to pay them off. Laura wanted a new car. Mom took out a home equity line. Laura's business ventures failed. Mom covered the losses. Each time the house absorbed the debt. Each time, my father's equity disappeared into the bottomless pit of my sister's needs. My mother had turned my father's life's work into Laura's personal ATM, and my father had been too sick to stop her, or maybe he'd never known at all. I sat at that table until 3 a.m, running numbers and scenarios. The house was worth about $300,000 in its current condition. The debt was $217,000. At the current rate of missed payments, the bank would foreclose within 63 days. Everything my father had built would be sold at auction to the highest bidder. I could tell my mother. I could confront her with the evidence, force her to face what she'd done. But I knew exactly how that conversation would go. She'd cry. She'd make excuses. She'd find a way to blame someone else. And nothing would change. The house would still be lost. I could let it happen. Let the bank take the property. Walk away from the whole mess and tell myself it wasn't my problem. My father was gone. My mother had made her choices. Laura had taken everything that wasn't nailed down. Why should I sacrifice anything to save them? But it wasn't about them. It was about my father. He'd built that house in 1982, the year I was born. I had pictures of him standing in the frame, sawdust in his hair, a hammer in his hand. He'd finished the porch the summer I turned 8. I'd helped him paint the shutters when I was 12, both of us covered in blue paint by the end, laughing at the mess we'd made. That house wasn't just a building, it was him. His sweat, his dreams, his love made physical. I wasn't going to let Laura's shopping addiction erase 40 years of my father's work, not without a fight. The next morning, I called a real estate attorney named Diana Walsh. She wasn't a friend yet, just a name I'd gotten from a colleague. I explained the situation in clinical terms: a family home in foreclosure, a daughter who wanted to buy it, a need for absolute discretion. Diana listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked one question: why the secrecy? I was quiet for a moment, trying to find the right words, because if they know I'm involved, they'll either guilt me into giving it back or resent me for having the means to save them. Either way, I lose. Diana understood immediately. She suggested an LLC, a legal entity that could purchase property without revealing the owner's name. We could buy the house from the bank, pay off the outstanding balance, and no one would ever know who was behind it. It took 2 months to finalize everything. I formed Carter Legacy Holdings, LLC. I negotiated with First National Bank. I liquidated a significant portion of my savings and took out a mortgage in the company's name. Total cost, $243,000, nearly everything I had. On a Tuesday afternoon in February, I signed the final papers in Diana's office. She witnessed my signature. No one else was there, no celebration, no fanfare, just paperwork and pen strokes and the quiet satisfaction of saving something that mattered. "How does it feel?" Diana asked when it was done. "You just bought your family's home, and they'll never know." I looked at the deed with my name on it, hidden behind layers of corporate structure. Like I finally have something that's mine, even if it's a secret. I told myself I'd reveal the truth eventually, when the time was right, when they'd proven they could be trusted. 3 years later, I was still waiting. For 3 years, I paid the mortgage every month through the LLC. I covered property taxes, insurance, repairs. When the roof leaked last winter, I hired a contractor and paid the bill without anyone knowing where the money came from. My mother and Laura continued living in the house, oblivious. They assumed they still owned it. They never checked the deed. They never asked questions. Meanwhile, Laura kept spending. New debts, new bailouts from Mom, new drains on resources that no longer existed. I watched from a distance, documenting everything, not planning revenge, building evidence, just in case. I visited the house exactly once during those 3 years. It was after a storm, and I wanted to check the roof. I parked across the street at 10 o'clock at night and watched the lights in the windows. My mother's silhouette moved past the living room curtain. Laura's car was in the driveway. I sat there for 20 minutes. Then I drove away without knocking. The present crashed back into focus. December 22nd. My phone buzzed with a text from Nathan confirming our meeting tomorrow morning. Then another notification. This one from Aunt Grace. Your father told me about you, Emily. He knew you were the only one who could save this family. When the time comes, I'll be there. And finally, a text from my mother. The first direct message she'd sent since telling me not to come for Christmas. Emily, please. We need to talk before tomorrow. There are things you don't know, things about your father. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I turned off my phone. Whatever she wanted to tell me, she'd had 38 years to say it. She could wait one more night. My mother showed up at my door for the second time in 3 days. But this time she wasn't looking for answers. She was looking for forgiveness she knew she didn't deserve. It was 9:47 in the evening, December 22nd. I'd been pacing my apartment since Nathan's warning about Laura, since my mother's cryptic text about things I didn't know. Diana was on standby, but there was nothing to do except wait for whatever came next. When the doorbell rang, I expected trouble. I checked the security camera and found my mother standing in the hallway alone, holding a bottle of wine. She wasn't wearing a coat despite the December cold. Her hands were trembling. She looked 10 years older than she had 3 days ago. I opened the door and studied her for a moment. The woman who had raised me, the woman who had overlooked me, the woman who was finally, after 38 years, standing on my doorstep because she needed something from me. I know you're waiting for Laura to make her next move, she said quietly. I am too, but I couldn't sit in that house alone tonight. Not on Christmas Eve. It's December 22nd, Mom. Christmas Eve is in 2 days. She shook her head slightly. It feels like Christmas Eve. Everything feels like it's ending. I stepped aside and let her in. She walked past me slowly, like she was entering a stranger's home. In some ways she was. She'd never spent more than an hour in my apartment. She'd never really seen the life I'd built without her. I think it's time we really talked, she said, settling onto my couch. Not about the house, about us. I poured wine for both of us and sat in the chair across from her. The silence between us was different than it had been during her last visit. Less hostile, more exhausted. We'd both been through a war in the past 48 hours, and we were only at the beginning. I've never had both my daughters hate me at the same time, she said finally. It's a strange feeling. I don't hate you, Mom. You should, after everything I put you through. I didn't argue. I couldn't argue. Because part of me did hate her, or at least hated what she'd done, what she'd failed to do, the love she'd given so freely to Laura and rationed so carefully to me. When Laura called me after I defended you, my mother continued, she said things I've never heard from her before. She called me a traitor, said I was choosing you over her for the first time. She made it sound like a crime. She looked at me, her eyes wet. But it wasn't the first time, was it? It was just the first time she noticed. I let that settle before I responded. It was the first time for me, too. I don't remember you ever taking my side before. My mother flinched like I'd slapped her. I know. And I'm so sorry. But sorry wasn't enough anymore. I'd been accepting apologies my whole life. Apologies that changed nothing. Apologies that were followed by the same patterns, the same neglect, the same invisible treatment. This time I needed more than words. Why Laura? I asked. The question I'd been carrying for decades finally escaped my mouth. Why was she always the priority? My mother took a long drink of wine before answering. When I left David, she said slowly, when I escaped that marriage, Laura was all I had. She was 2 years old. I was terrified I'd ruined her life before it started. She stared into her glass like she was watching memories play across the surface. I swore I would protect her from everything. From the world, from struggle, from ever feeling abandoned the way I had felt. Then I met Robert, and we had you, and you were easy. I flinched at the word. She saw it. I don't mean that as an insult, she said quickly. You were self-sufficient from the moment you could walk. You solved your own problems. You never cried for help. Laura cried constantly. She needed reassurance, attention, validation, and I gave it to her, all of it, because I thought that's what protecting her meant. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice cracked. I didn't realize I was teaching her that she could take and take without consequences, and I didn't realize I was teaching you that you didn't matter enough to receive. The words hung between us. My mother had finally said what I'd always known but never heard spoken aloud. You taught me that needing anything was a weakness, I said quietly, so I stopped needing. And I punished you for being strong by treating your strength as permission to ignore you. For a moment, neither of us spoke. My mother's protection of Laura had been purchased with my invisibility. She finally saw the equation clearly. I could see it in her face. Do you remember my 16th birthday? I asked. She closed her eyes. I remember. I waited for you until 9 p.m., made my own cake from a box mix, ate it alone watching TV. You came home at 11 and said you forgot. I told myself it wasn't a big deal because you didn't seem upset. I was 16, Mom. I'd already learned not to show when I was upset. She didn't have a response to that. I continued. What about my college graduation? I looked for you in the crowd for 20 minutes during the ceremony. I told myself maybe you were running late, maybe you were in the bathroom. Laura had that fight with her boyfriend, my mother said weakly. She was hysterical. I thought you would understand. I did understand. That's the worst part. I understood so well that I stopped expecting you to show up. And when you finally didn't show up for enough things, I stopped inviting you. That's why you didn't tell me about your promotion, or your apartment, or your life. Why would I? You'd just find a way to make it about Laura. My mother set down her wine glass. Her hands were shaking again, worse than before. I've spent 64 years thinking I was a good mother, she said, that I did my best, that any mistakes were small, forgivable. She looked around my apartment, at the life I'd built without her. But looking at this place, at your career, at who you became, I realize I had nothing to do with any of it. You built all of this in spite of me, not because of me. She started crying then. Not the delicate tears she used when she wanted sympathy, real tears, the kind that came from somewhere deep and broken. I lost you decades ago, she said through her sobs. I was just too blind to notice. And now Laura is gone too, running to a man who will only use her, and I'm sitting here realizing I failed both of you in completely different ways. I watched my mother fall apart on my couch, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not vindication, something closer to grief. Grief for the relationship we could have had. Grief for the mother she could have been. You can't fix Laura, I said finally. She has to want to change, and right now she doesn't. What about us? My mother looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Can we be fixed? I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe that 3 days of honesty could undo 38 years of damage. But I'd stopped lying to myself a long time ago. I don't know if we can be fixed, I said carefully. But I know we can't even start unless things actually change. Not just tonight, permanently. Tell me what you need. Anything. I need you to see me. Not as the backup daughter. Not as the one who doesn't need attention. Me. I'm trying. Trying is a start. But I've spent 38 years watching you try with Laura and fail. I need to see that this time is different. My mother nodded slowly, accepting terms she didn't fully understand. I'm not ready to forgive you, I added. Forgiveness takes time, but acknowledgement is a start. Then I'll keep acknowledging, she said quietly, for as long as it takes. We sat in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence, not hostile, not frozen, just waiting. I refilled our wine glasses. A small gesture. A beginning. We'd been talking for 2 hours when my phone buzzed. A text from the building's front desk. Miss Carter, there are 2 people here asking to see you. A woman named Laura Brennan and a man who says he's family. I showed the message to my mother. Her face went pale. David, she whispered. She brought David here. I could tell them to leave, I said. I don't have to let them up. My mother stood. Her spine straightened. Something shifted in her eyes. No. I've been running from David Mercer for 34 years. I'm done running. She looked at me. You wanted to see me change? This is me changing. I'm not hiding anymore. I texted the front desk. Send them up. 2 minutes later, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Then a knock. I opened the door to find my sister standing next to a man I'd never seen before. Gray-haired, sharp-eyed, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Emily, Laura said flatly, this is David, my father. He has something to tell you about yours. I met Nathan at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the house. Neutral ground, public space. No chance of Laura walking in and turning it into a scene. It was 8 o'clock in the morning, December 23rd, 6 hours before the family meeting. Last night I'd sent David and Laura away without letting them speak. My mother had stood beside me at the door, pale but resolute, and we'd simply closed it in their faces. Whatever David Mercer had come to say could wait until I had all the facts. Nathan arrived, looking like he hadn't slept. Dark circles under his eyes, shirt wrinkled, and his wedding ring was conspicuously absent from his finger. I noticed the bare finger but didn't comment. He sat across from me, ordered nothing, and got straight to the point. I need to tell you something about Laura. Something I should have told someone a long time ago. I waited. I'd learned that silence drew out more truth than questions. She's not who you think she is, Nathan said. His voice was flat, exhausted. She's not who I thought she was either. He told me about the past 4 years of his marriage, the secret bank account he'd discovered 6 months ago, the money she'd been siphoning from their joint accounts, small amounts but consistent. Then the loan application she'd forged his signature on last year, $35,000, money he knew nothing about until the collection notices started arriving. When I confronted her, Nathan said she cried, promised to change, blamed her difficult childhood. He laughed bitterly. I believed her. Every time I believed her. Because that's what she does. She makes you feel like the villain for noticing. That sounds familiar, I said. I told him about the house, about the refinancing, the foreclosure, the money trail that led directly to Laura's accounts. He put his head in his hands. I'm such an idiot. You're not an idiot. You trusted your wife. That's what you were supposed to do. He looked up at me with something I hadn't expected. Gratitude. You're the first person in this family who's told me the truth, he said. Everyone else just protects her. I realized then that Nathan wasn't my enemy. He was another casualty. 6 hours later, I drove to the family home. 247 Maple Street. The house my father built. The house that had nearly been lost to my sister's greed. The house that now belonged to me. I parked in the driveway instead of on the street. It was a small thing, but it mattered. For 38 years, I'd parked on the street like a visitor. Today, I parked like an owner. The house looked the same as it always had. Colonial style, blue shutters my father had painted himself. The porch he'd rebuilt twice. I hadn't been inside in over a year. The last time, Laura had made a comment about my lonely apartment lifestyle and my mother had laughed. I'd left before dessert and sworn I wouldn't come back. But today was different. Today I wasn't a guest. I was the landlord. I used my key. The one I'd had for 3 years but never used. The door opened to the smell of my childhood. Cedar. Old books. My mother's lavender sachets in the hallway closet. For a moment I was 8 years old again, running through these halls before I understood that I was invisible. Then I heard voices from the living room. Everyone was already here. I walked in to find them arranged like actors waiting for a play to begin. My mother sat in the armchair by the window, looking smaller than she had the night before. Laura was on the couch, arms crossed, refusing to make eye contact. Nathan stood by the far window, deliberately separate from his wife, and in the corner chair, white-haired and sharp-eyed, sat Aunt Grace. She was holding a manila envelope and watching me with an expression I couldn't read. The tension in that room was thick enough to choke on. Laura's leg bounced with agitation. My mother's hands twisted in her lap. Nathan stared at the floor. Only Aunt Grace looked calm, like she'd been waiting for this moment for years. I didn't sit. I walked to the fireplace and stood in my father's spot, the place where he used to stand when he had something important to say. I set my folder on the mantel. "Thank you for coming," I said. "I know this isn't how any of you wanted to spend the day before Christmas Eve, but we need to have a conversation that's been delayed far too long." Laura snapped immediately. "This is ridiculous. We don't need a family meeting to discuss your power trip." I ignored her and continued. In 2018, our father was diagnosed with cancer. That same year, Mom refinanced this house for the first time. Between 2018 and 2021, the house was refinanced 3 more times. Total debt accumulated, $217,000. I pulled documents from my folder and spread them on the coffee table. The money went to pay off Laura's credit cards, her car loan, her failed business ventures, and various emergencies that always seemed to involve her. By the time Dad died, this house was 63 days from foreclosure. I looked around the room. None of you knew because none of you were paying attention. You were too busy pretending everything was fine. My mother stared at the floor. She'd known most of this already. Laura's face cycled through shock, denial, and settling finally on anger. Nathan's jaw tightened with every number I spoke. Aunt Grace nodded slowly, unsurprised. "So I bought the house," I continued. "Through an LLC, I paid off the bank, took over the mortgage, and have been maintaining this property for 3 years. You've been living rent-free in my house since 2021. Laura stood up so fast she knocked over her coffee cup. The brown liquid spread across the carpet, but no one moved to clean it. "You're lying. This is some kind of scam." "Mom, tell her she's lying." My mother didn't move, didn't speak. Her silence was its own confession. Laura turned her fury on me. "You did this to control us, to hold it over our heads. You've always been jealous of me, of my marriage, my life, everything. This is your revenge because Mom asked you not to come for Christmas. If I wanted control," I said calmly, "I would have evicted you the day I signed the deed. I didn't. If I wanted revenge, I would have let the bank take the house and watched you scramble. I didn't. I did this because Dad built this house with his own hands, and I wasn't going to let anyone, not the bank, not your debt, take it from our family." I turned to my mother. "I didn't tell you because I knew you wouldn't understand. I knew you'd find a way to make it about Laura. I knew you'd ask me to give it back to her." My mother said nothing. There was nothing she could say. "So what?" Laura's voice was rising. "You're going to throw us out? Ruin Christmas? I haven't decided anything yet." "That depends on what happens in this room today." Aunt Grace stood slowly, the manila envelope in her hands. Her presence commanded attention in a way that silenced even Laura. "If I may," she said. The room fell quiet. Grace was the family elder, my father's generation. Her voice carried weight. "Robert knew this day would come," she said. "Not the specifics, but he knew there would be a reckoning." She looked around the room. "Your father came to me before he died. He was worried about the house, about the debt, about Margaret's decisions. He told me Emily is the only one who can save this family. When the time comes, support her." She turned to look directly at me. "I've watched this family overlook Emily for 38 years. Robert saw it too. It broke his heart." She paused. "Your father was proud of you, Emily. He knew you'd do the right thing. He trusted you more than anyone." My mother was crying quietly now. Nathan had moved closer to where I stood, a silent shift of alliance. Laura looked like she'd been slapped. "This is all a setup," Laura exploded. "You've been planning this for years. You and Dad and Grace. You've always hated me." "No one hates you, Laura," I said. "But no one can keep protecting you from yourself either. I don't need protection. I need a family that doesn't constantly judge me." She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. Then she stopped and turned to Nathan. "Aren't you coming?" Nathan didn't move. His voice was quiet but firm. "No. I think I need to hear the rest of this." Laura stared at her husband, then at me, then at our mother who wouldn't meet her eyes. "You're all going to regret this," she said. "Every single one of you." She slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. The silence after Laura left was deafening. No one moved, no one spoke. Then Nathan walked to the couch and sat down heavily. "There's more," he said quietly. "Things about Laura that none of you know. Things I found last week." He pulled out his phone and opened an app. He turned the screen toward us. "She's been transferring money to an account I've never seen before. $15,000 in the past 3 months alone. And the account holder is not in her name. It's in the name of someone called David Mercer." Aunt Grace's face went pale. "Who is David Mercer?" I asked. Grace looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "He's Laura's biological father. The man your mother was married to before Robert. The man we all thought was dead. The name hung in the air like smoke. David Mercer. Laura's biological father. A man everyone thought was dead. A man my sister had been secretly sending money to for months." I looked at my mother. Her face had gone white. Her hands gripped the armchair so tightly her knuckles looked like bone. "Mom," I said, "who is David Mercer?" She couldn't answer. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She looked like a woman watching her house burn down. Aunt Grace stepped forward. "I think it's time you heard the full story, Emily. The story your mother has been hiding for 38 years. Nathan leaned forward on the couch, his confusion matching mine. "Wait. Laura told me her father died when she was a baby. A car accident." Grace shook her head slowly. "That's the story Margaret told everyone. But David Mercer didn't die in a car accident. He went to prison." The room seemed to contract around those words. I stared at my aunt, waiting for an explanation that made sense. None of this matched anything I'd ever been told about my family, about my mother, about Laura. Grace took control of the narrative because my mother clearly couldn't speak. "Margaret married David Mercer when she was 19, Grace began. "She was young, naive, desperate to escape our childhood home. David was charming at first. They all are. Then he became controlling, then violent." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "Laura was born in 1990. By then, the marriage was a nightmare. David ran a series of scams: insurance fraud, identity theft, forgery. He was good at it for a while, but criminals always get caught eventually. When Laura was 2 years old," Grace continued, "David was arrested for embezzlement and fraud. The FBI had been building a case against him for months. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison." I looked at my mother. She was crying silently now, tears streaming down her face without a sound. "Margaret was humiliated," Grace said. "She told everyone David died in a car accident. She moved to Boston, changed her last name back, started over. She met Robert 3 years later. He adopted Laura, gave her his name, raised her as his own." "Robert knew the truth," Grace added. "He was the only one who did. Besides me." I processed this information slowly, turning it over in my mind like a strange object I'd found on the street. We had different fathers. Laura and I were half-sisters. Robert had been my biological father, but not hers. He'd adopted Laura, raised her as his own, never treated her differently. Or maybe he had treated her differently. Maybe that was why my mother had always been so protective, so terrified of Laura falling apart. "Did Laura know?" I asked. "About David?" My mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told her when she turned 18. She was furious, said I'd lied to her whole life. Grace nodded. Laura went through a difficult period after that. Acting out, spending money, making bad decisions. Margaret thought giving her more support would help her heal. I connected the dots immediately. That's when the favoritism got worse. You were compensating. I was trying to make up for the trauma I caused her, my mother said, and I paid the price for Laura's healing. The words came out flat, without accusation, just stating a fact. For 38 years I'd been sacrificed on the altar of Laura's fragile psyche. Every time my mother chose her over me, every time I was overlooked or forgotten, it was because Laura was broken and I wasn't. I finally understood why. But understanding didn't make 38 years of invisibility hurt any less. Nathan spoke up, his voice tight with frustration. This still doesn't explain why Laura's sending money to him now. If he was in prison, if he's supposedly been dead for 30 years, why is she transferring $15,000 to his account? Grace sighed. David was released from prison 8 years ago. He served his full sentence. No early parole for good behavior. She paused. He reached out to Laura about a year after that. My mother's head snapped up. What? She never told me. She didn't tell anyone, Grace said. I only know because I saw them together once about 5 years ago, at a restaurant in Cambridge. I confronted Laura afterward. She begged me not to tell Margaret. Nathan pulled out his phone again, scrolling through the records he'd compiled. 15,000 in the past 3 months, he said. But the pattern goes back further. I've traced payments going back at least 2 years. He looked up at us. Total estimate, over $80,000. $80,000. Laura had drained our family home of $200,000 to pay off her debts. Now she was draining her husband of $80,000 more, and all of it was flowing to a man who should have stayed a ghost. Is he blackmailing her? I asked. Or is she helping him willingly? No one had an answer. David Mercer is a con man, Grace said finally. Whatever he's doing, it's not out of fatherly love. Nathan stood up and walked to the window. His shoulders were rigid with tension. I've been married to her for 4 years, he said. 4 years of lies. He turned to face us. The forged loan application wasn't the only thing I found. There's a secret bank account, the transfers to David Mercer, and credit card debt she hid from me. Another $40,000. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I thought I knew her. I thought we were building a life together. I thought she loved me. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said the words I'd been expecting since I saw his bare ring finger that morning. I can't do this anymore. I've already talked to a divorce attorney. My mother gasped. Nathan, please, give her a chance to explain. Nathan turned to her, not unkindly but firmly. Mrs. Carter, I've given her dozens of chances. Every time she cries, promises to change, and then does the same thing again. I'm done being her safety net. I understood Nathan completely. I'd watched the same pattern my whole life. Laura would mess up, someone would rescue her, she'd promise to do better, then she'd mess up again. The cycle never ended because no one ever let her face the consequences. For what it's worth, I said to Nathan, I'm sorry. You deserved better. He met my eyes. So did you. What are you going to do? He asked me. About the house? About all of this? I don't know yet, but I'm not making any decisions tonight. The room fell into an exhausted silence.